Dylan?
In taking a look at the actual policy, the red line version, it doesn't, okay, it does say no gift policy. I'm not a member of the committee, so I can't make a motion.
You can suggest.
I just would reiterate the, no, yeah, I would urge you to say, let's take out the no gift section. That adopted, we have adopted a strict gift policy. There's, I think we're really close. I guess I don't see any reason to send it back if there's concurrence on saying, taking out the verbiage zero gift policy or no gift policy, but saying a strict gift policy. And I don't know if anybody else, has as much angst over the meeting site language as I do. But it just seems like we could say food or beverages items provided at a meeting, including meals in conjunction with attendance at meetings relating to investments, blah, blah, blah. I don't think we have to get that specific. I understand where you're going, Michael. I just don't know if the lay person out there that's reading our policy would have that same viewpoint if the language remained. I know I'm taking it very literally, but I think others might also. The only other issue that I would have is in the letter that actually goes out, that we would also remove the zero tolerance for verbiage from that, so. I think we're close. I don't think we need to send it back as long as we can get consensus on what we do want to have changed.
Okay. Mr. Chang? Oh, Chris.
I'll always defer to the board.
No, go ahead.
I just want to make a couple comments so the committee sake. I guess I have as investment officer, a different point of view and a different recommendation than what was in the memo and a different point of view from what you're discussing. First of all, as Brian said, what we have works very well right now. I understand the desire to move to best practices, and I applaud that. But I also don't want it to interfere with our ability to do our job. As Brian said, we need a policy. I would advocate one that's principles-based. We have an electronic tracking system right now that works very well with staff. It's been in place for over 6 years, and it's been very effective. It allows us to coach and manage the staff and give them guidance. But I think, like you heard today, rules-based systems make it really complex, and I don't want you or our staff to have to call Jill every time we travel to know what to do. And I can tell you the staff is confused about what they are or not allowed to do. I am concerned about the hard $50 limit without some allowance for working meals and those types of things. I know the problem with creating an exception, but when we do due diligence on a investment, especially in the private markets area, so private equity, real estate, and infrastructure, it often takes 9 months, and that does involve lots of interaction, generally a lot of working lunches now. And I hate to add something to the mix, which makes it complex, but it also includes travel. A good example for DELO, when she's looking at pipelines or Stephen was looking at agriculture, you have to get up in the air and fly over those things. And we don't have a mechanism. I would love for STRS to pay it, but there's no mechanism because we don't have a contract yet for us to pay for those types of things. We've got to find, I would encourage you to kick it back so we as a staff can work together and figure out what's the best way to not create too many exceptions, but then allow us to carry out our business. And so that, the staff, they're professionals, they're college educated, but when they can't even figure out what they can or can't do, it makes it really complex. So it is hard to do, but if we could be principles-based, I understand the desire to lower below the FPPC. But I would tell you, even $50, while it's small, that's a hard number for some of our staff, and especially with the international travel we do. That goes very quickly in some countries with currency translations. So,
Chris, do you think there should be a separate policy for staff and the board?
I would say no, but I leave that totally up to you. I guess we've usually not divided. They've always been together.
Before I turn the mic over to Mr. Chang, I would suggest that I personally would like to hear more about how this policy would specifically hamper the staff. Because I hear generally what you're saying, but I'm not sure I can picture in my head what's going on now that this policy would preclude, or this policy would hamper. That would be very helpful to me. Mr. Chang?
Thank you. Can you explain how the methodology for calculating food, right? You get different interpretations from different entities. So for instance, I sign in, attend a reception, I have a bottle of water, but because they prorated over the number of attendees as a factor of what the total costs are, suddenly my bottle of mineral water has a reportable gift value of $53, right? So then I pay it down by the $4 or whatever. And so I just want to get the interpretation from this authority as to when we go forward, because this board's pretty active and people go to receptions, LA pension trustees or something, they might pop in and out, and we'll be honest, it's like you had 2 carrots or something like that, but then you took something of value. So I want to make sure we get this down correctly for the record.
And Mr. Jung, we have sort of in the last couple of years, we have addressed that issue, because what happens is if you ask for sort of an accounting from the person providing it, they start dividing up all the costs, the overhead for providing that bottle of water. And we don't think that meets either the spirit or the letter of the law. It really is the cost of the bottle of water. And so having something like that, figuring that out, I think for us the rule of reason would be, what is a bottle of mineral water worth in New York? And that may very well be $54, but not because of paying for the room or renting out the time, but or the actual service, somebody handing it to you. And so that's the way we have always interpreted it. We think that's the letter of the law, and the spirit behind the law is, what's the actual value? Because the value of the venue is already being provided, and so this is sort of something separate. And the venue is covered in other rules. It's, is it something that we've paid for? Is it something that's, that's where the conference is, and you have to go where the conference is. Unfortunately, sometimes it's in a location that we would not like it to be in, and then we don't get to, we don't want to go. But yes, I certainly think that's always been our consistent approach, is look at the actual cost or the estimated cost of the particular item provided.
What type of documentation requirements will we have going forward?
Well, that's so the policy, the way it's contemplated, is that there is no documentation, that the policy is adherence or non-adherence. Certainly, we're open to suggestion, but we looked at sort of the administrative burden on both the individual staff member or board member, and also on CalSTRS staff, of trying to track gifts, if you will, or items under $50 or over $50. I think it's, if there's a question, we try to provide guidance, and of course we always provide, if you will, ad hoc guidance. But we did not put in a tracking or compliance function in this particular policy.
Is that consistent with the way CalPERS is doing it?
Yes, their policy is actually, it's pretty simplified, and so they don't have an administrative component to their policy. It's really just a $50 limit, without any explanation, I guess, in that regard.
Thank you. Well, I too am not a member of this committee, so I can't make a motion, but I can urge my fellow board members who are to do
We're
what they
urging
can
over
to
here.
move things forward. I would just point out that we have been talking about this for about an hour now, and we have mostly been spending time trying to understand the exceptions. I think anytime we are putting in place a policy, we need to think what the effort involved in complying with the policy will be relative to the benefit of the policy. And Brian said in an earlier response to one of my comments that the issue isn't that the $50 or the cup of coffee influences the decision, and therefore it's okay outside of the zero gift policy. It's an acceptable exception. So I think we really have to wonder how much are we doing to improve the functioning of this system by having a $50 gift policy, when we kind of are all acknowledging, and our general counsel is acknowledging, that those cups of coffee or those working lunches are not likely to influence us, compared to the astonishing amount of confusion that this policy is creating, and the amount of work that it is going to engender, and the questions that it is going to pose for board members and staff. And so I just think on kind of a cost-benefit basis, I'm not sure what we're getting out of having a zero-tolerance gift policy with then a whole bunch of exceptions. It would seem to me a lot simpler just I'm not sure I can quite go where Chris is going to say just, principles-based. I think we need some kind of limit, but I think $50 is a perfectly reasonable limit that is not going to undermine the credibility of the operation of this system.
Just a few comments. First of all, I totally agree with Michelle that simpler is better, and I also agree with Michael that when you have lawyers drafting things, you have to have definitions and you have to have exceptions, and I don't know how we can get around that. I think we're off of the zero policy talk. I think we are talking about $50. The conversation's changed a little bit. I was going to jump in earlier, but I see it's changed. When somebody said, how could a cup of coffee be intended to influence us? We're a $168 billion fund. Everything given to you, whether it's a stick of chewing gum, is intended to influence you. Paul said it the right way when he said, but we're not going to be influenced by that. We're confident that, this $50 limit, we're not going to be influenced by that. But to say that it was, it's not intended to, it absolutely is always intended to. And the way you can test this theory is stop being a board member and see how many cups of coffee you get. I know that. I was a board member on 5 pension funds. I became a nobody pretty fast. No cashews at Christmas, nothing. So I think the language at the very end of this draft policy is not helpful, because I think it gets us in trouble. If we're going to pick $50, then I think we're already acknowledging, hey, we're doing that for administrative ease, and we're confident $50 isn't going to influence anyone. But to have it in there, you do not have knowledge it was offered with the intent to influence you. It will always be offered with the intent to influence you. So I would sort of say, let's take that language out. Then my other point is, to Chris's point, and I whispered this to Chris before we started, I've also had plenty of time serving on advisory committees. I don't think I ever ate a lunch that was less than $50 when I was on an advisory committee meeting. They're always, lavish affairs. I don't know what we do with that, but I just wanted to put that out there, that if you think that $50 is going to, be relevant when you're serving on an advisory committee, it really isn't. The other question I had, so I guess this is going to Dana's point about, does this need to go back? I think it certainly needs to go back. I don't think we've had enough discussion on it. Citing a statute in a policy, I'm not sure what that does. I sort of am of the school that I like to paraphrase so you can understand what the statute says. The statute starts out by saying, and I'm looking now at page 21, where it's government code defining of a gift, and it says, any payment that confers a personal benefit on a recipient to the extent that consideration of equal or greater value is not received. And let me share another example with you. Let's say that a law firm invites Brian out to a $300 dinner, and all they want to do is pick his brain on, You know, what does it take to be successful as an outside lawyer serving public pension funds? I can tell you, in 15 minutes, he will have conferred on them far more than $300 worth of value. So then he'd probably have a $500 meal, or maybe he could have a $3,000 meal, because any little nugget that he explains, here's how you become successful dealing with public pension funds, is going to be so valuable to that vendor. So I know this is in the statute, but this is one place where I'd like to think that we would be stricter than the statute, because any advice that any of you give anybody who's trying to do business with CalSTRS is going to be worth far more than any meal you could probably eat. So then my only other comments are on I think the guidelines are very helpful, and I think we can make those, look a little better. Again, I wouldn't repeat the statute because I don't think it's helpful, but one of the things I would urge you to change, and I'm now looking at page 25, the third bullet point down, it says tickets for admission to sporting events if you pay the face value for such tickets or admission. Well, let me tell you, the face value for the Final Four and the Masters Golf Tournament, that's not even relevant. So I would say, you could really get a lot of benefits by just paying face value. That would be huge, thousands of dollars worth of benefits. So I don't think that's as strict as we need it to be. And I guess my other comments are more minor, but I think that's enough to say I think it needs more work.
To give it back to our legal staff to dialogue. It is kind of frustrating that we've been talking for an hour and I do still feel, like there's a lack of clarity. I think it seems like we have, I think Chris's comments give me pause, because I do think, I don't think it's a good idea to have two different policies for the board and this investment staff, but I think our worlds are a little different in terms of, if I do something with the AFL-CIO, that's usually once or twice a year, and you guys are doing business with similar vendors over a long period of time, oftentimes. So I'm sensitive to that, and I certainly don't want our policy to somehow hamstring the investment staff. And so I think that's a concern I have, and I don't know how CalPERS deals with that. If they have this $50 a year limit, I don't know how that works with their investment staff. So I'd be curious to kind of hear about that on their end. But obviously, I think we need more information about that. And then I think just clarity would be great, to keep it really simple, so that I'm going to CII next week, and there's events I'm asked to speak at before and after, and I'm still not clear. Okay, so if I do this event for AFL-CIO, what do I pay for? What can I eat? And I think for me, I know this is a challenging job, and the more clarity we have and the more simple we make it, I feel like I'm happy to serve and lead, but it just kind of makes it challenging at times. So as simple as we can make the policy, again, I think our board strives to err on the side of caution, but if we could have clarity for the public and for ourselves, and not hamstring our investment staff, that's where I'd like us to go. So I move that we kick it back with those recommendations and move on.
Before we try to clarify what those recommendations are, I just want to make sure we list them. I feel like I'm sort of stuck between two worlds here. I am your lawyer, your general counsel, and so I'm trying to advise, what I think is appropriate for the operation of the board. At the same time, we're trying to deliver a product that meets everyone's needs. So I have a couple of comments. One, I would recommend to the committee that get some input, but do not send it back to affected staff to sort of tinker with the policy so it fits their needs. I think this is a policy decision from the board, and recognition that we want to that the board wants to address the policies so that it works for the business of CalSTRS. I think that's important, but I would strongly recommend against sending it back and having everyone who's affected by the policy sort of get in and make their recommendation. One, because you'll never get to the finish line. And that's pretty obvious when we start talking about this. And the other is, you start having inconsistencies, and this goes to Nancy's comments, and I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of her comments beforehand. But for example, the definition of gift is from the statute, so people operating under the policy don't have to have two definitions of gifts. You have the FPPC definition of gift, which everyone has to follow under the law, and then if we were to pose another definition of gift, then it would be, okay, is this a gift? Is that a gift? Well, is it a gift under the CalSTRS stringent gift policy, or is it a gift under the FPPC, and how does that work? And the other thing I know you all know as board members, and I know that all of us know as Form 700 filers, the FPPC rules alone raise the same issues that Chris Ailman talked about. We have these conversations constantly with investment staff on how do they comply with the FPPC rules on these same issues. So it's not going to, no matter how much you tinker with the policy, it is my opinion, no matter how much we tinker with the policy and try to get specific on it, it's not going to eliminate all those issues. We're always going to have to provide you guidance in particular circumstances. From what I think the consensus I hear is simpler is better. Again, if I have, this is just putting on my advisor hat, I agree. Simpler is better because then we have to start taking apart in this circumstance. And for example, in response to Mr. Chung's question, I think that's what we do. We sort of provide that rather than say, okay, here's the calculus, here's the algorithm you follow. If you get a bottle of water and it's in a market, you consider the consumer price index. And anyway, I'm trying to make it workable for you. I feel like I'm, just as your counsel, I feel like I'm sort of torn between two roles here. One is trying to get you a policy that you want or that works for you, and the other is to advise on sort of the process for the policy. So I just want, certainly we're at your, we'll follow whatever direction you have. I would like us to, we have gone on quite a while. I just would like to make sure that whatever instruction that we get from the committee, that we can sort of parse it out to make sure that we address all the things that you want us to bring back, so that we can endeavor to have a complete response and a complete package, so you don't have to spend another extensive amount of time trying to figure out what it is that's going on. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this conversation's gone on for quite some time. I just wanted to chime in briefly before the discussion ends as a representative of an elected official who serves on both this fund and the fund across the river. I agree with Mr. McGuire that consistency would be great. And I also agree with the other committee members' comments about simplicity. If you look at the exceptions we have in the proposed policy, 2 of the 3 are around food and beverage. And then if you go down to the guidelines, the first bullet under gifts to avoid, food and beverage. And so I think making it clean, $50 limit, I'd be what Treasurer Lockyer would support.
Do you have sufficient direction at this point?
I don't know if other folks were taking notes and got sufficiently what the guidance was. I was sort of trying to.
I think what I'm hearing as a consensus is that
Okay, Michelle might have it then.
is that we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good here, and I'm hearing. Notwithstanding some discussion about whether we need one at all, and that was your first question, I think what I'm hearing is a consensus that that we should have a gift policy, but that we should try to modify this to address the concerns that you've heard here. My admonition would be consistent with the last comment. Consistency with existing statutes, consistency with existing policies elsewhere, simplicity to the extent that it can be done in a manner that that doesn't add additional confusion. And I would add one additional concept that hasn't been discussed here, which is that there's no set of specific rules that are going to address every problem. And what I would suggest is that there be kind of going back to the principles concept that Chris mentioned, that there be kind of an overarching rule that notwithstanding anything to the contrary, you cannot engage in any conduct that is, you know, has, you know, these words, and these are probably not the right words, but the appearance of impropriety. You know, I mean, we all kind of, you know, it's like pornography. You kind of know it when you see it, and you knew you shouldn't have been doing it, but you can't do it just because it wasn't picked up in the specific rules. And we want to be able to look at you and say, you knew you shouldn't have done that, and we're going to hold you accountable for it, even though it wasn't under the rules. So, you know, and I think adding that might allow us to simplify the rest of the rules a little bit. So with that, I think we've kind of beaten this horse enough for the day. And unless there's an objection, I will close out this item.
So Brian, it sounds like you're going to center around that $50. I thought most of you were comfortable in that area of working around the CalPERS rule in some fashion. We would, I think, vet that and make sure it makes sense in our business environment. But it did sound the first threshold being that you have some recognition there may be a need for a gift policy stricter than the FPPC limits, given the unusual nature of this business and the things that have happened in this business around the country. So with that in mind, we would look at the CalPERS debate and rule and see if that works, it sounds like. Is that fair? And work from that model?
Yep.
I believe, though, just a point of order, there's a motion on the table, I believe, to send it back. And so,
No, I don't think we need it.
okay. Just wanted you to know it was there.
All right.
Wanted to
Sure.
clarify, so will Brian, will you be working with Chris and Nancy on some of the points they raised to sort of bring that back to you? Or-
Yes, I will. With the guidance of the committee in mind, in other words.
Perspectives, right.
And simplicity and overall principles. So what I heard at the end was that, you know, we don't want a 50-page gift policy that tries to address all these different, I'm going to say individual concerns or concerns as different people see them, but something
Right,
that is easier to interpret.
But as you look at the CalPERS policy, chatting with Chris on how that would, you know, impact him and getting that perspective maybe in the next version. Okay.
Yeah, that certainly was done and will be done.
I do want to make sure you all, because I don't think we made the point to you clear enough. On the advisory boards, that's not an issue at all. Or currently in our practice, the system pays for those meals because it's embedded. We have viewed that embedded as a fee in the contract. So this isn't creating an issue for the staff. On the advisory boards, relative to due diligence, that is another matter. That was the examples Chris was giving you. But that's where the issue is.
And sorry, just to correct you, that we pay
Right.
for
Twice.
the advisory boards twice. We
Right.
paid in the fee, but then we asked the GP to bill us, and we paid discreetly on our own. We've been doing that for about 2 years,
Right.
so. But advisory boards are covered.
And I would ask you when you come back to talk a little bit more about the diligence. Because in my mind, that's not a gift if it's supporting your ability to do what you're trying to do. And I could be completely wrong on that. I've not gone into that. But I would appreciate a little more meat on that bone. Mr. Lano?
No, it's okay.
There are no other comments or questions. We will close out item number 3. The staff has requested some time to fix the sound system, or maybe just teach me how to use it. So it will take, do we need 15 minutes or 10 minutes, or how much time do we need?
5 minutes?
5 minutes, is that enough?
Do-
Okay, 5-minute break. Governance Committee is back in session. We're now on the insider trading policy. Mr. Bartow.
Thank you. So the item you have before you is the second reading on the insider trading policy. The last time we brought before you sort of a discussion on the issue of did we want to update our insider trading policy, and some basic decision points. So we're bringing it back a little bit more refined. And what we're asking and what we're recommending, and I have to say my recommendation at this point is different than what's in the material, so I'll clarify that. But it really is based upon what we see as the SEC's sort of shot across the bow of the public pension plans about not just having a policy, which is important, but we already have one, but also training and informing staff of that policy. The other part of it is in consultation with very, very knowledgeable experts in the field, was whether or not we wanted to try to address those issues where there was confidential information that would not fall within the SEC guidelines as far as publicly traded equities and those type of situations. So we do have, some potential revisions, and I do, here's where my recommendation changed a little bit. Revising the, number one, the potential revision, revising the scope of the policy. I'm on Board Governance 35, to cover any CalSTRS investment rather than just publicly traded securities. I don't, we already have a policy on the misuse of confidential information outside of the SEC rules. We have it, you probably have all signed what we call the ISO Form 1949, but it is the confidential non-disclosure and acceptable use agreement, and the acceptable use as the acceptable use of confidential information. So, and then the proposal that we originally put out there was sort of cross-referencing an existing piece of the policy, and I think, based upon input from Nancy and I, and it's, well, why are we cross-referencing something that's already in the policy manual? It's not necessary. That, I think, causes a little bit of confusion. So we can walk through this in the interest of time. I think maybe we should open it up to questions, because I think the principles on this one are perhaps a little bit easier chunks to chew. And so I just wanted to say that so on page 37, you'll see option 3. What I am suggesting is, Jill and I are suggesting, is option 3A, that we address the misuse of confidential information through our existing policy on appropriate use, and not squeeze something into our insider trading, which very much tracks the law, the SEC guidance and the law. So basically, we have a policy that we want to add a trading piece to, because we think that's the clear guidance that we've gotten, and then it's our opinion that we've already addressed the use of non-confidential information in the non-public equity arena. So that's
basically keeping the same standards, but making it clear that it applies to the transaction that follows on from the misuse of the non-public information.
yes.
Okay.
Did-
Mr.
anything
Rosenstiel?
you wanted to add?
Oh,
I'm sorry, no?
Just a question, because you know the improper use of confidential information policy better than I do. Is that you can't use confidential information for your own personal gain, or would it be, it can't be used even for the benefit of CalSTRS, the organization? Because that was the one little crevice I thought was missing from, I think, a point that Harry might have mentioned is, and the example would be, we have insider information that comes through publicly traded companies going to do something. So we know that's insider information under the securities laws. We're not going to use it to buy securities, but we're going to use it to buy real estate around this place where we know they're going to put up an office park. It's not for our personal benefit, but it's for the benefit of the system. And I think that was confusing until we saw the Alabama enforcement action. And so I think that's why we were talking about expanding it beyond publicly traded securities to private markets as well. And I thought that perhaps we could just have a little preamble sentence, and this isn't very artfully written, but something that says, like, in keeping with the spirit or the purpose of the federal securities laws and the enforcement actions by the SEC, board and staff will not use any material non-public information for any private market investments, including purchases and sales, even if it is for the benefit of CalSTRS. I think that then would not let us do what they did in Alabama. But perhaps the improper use of confidential information policy would cover that, but I was thinking that was more personal rather than for the system.
And with that, I'm sorry, we haven't really had a chance to discuss that, but it wouldn't just be for personal, it would be for any private gain. So an example, if the confidential information was provided to another, and they could gain from it as opposed to.
That's tippy stuff that's
Right.
already covered by the
Okay,
federal.
just want to make sure we're clear on the concept.
Mr. Rosensteel?
Yeah, I have exactly the same issue that Nancy just raised, and Brian and I did talk about this, which is that the policy refers specifically to for private gain. And federal insider trading laws don't specify that it has to be for private gain. So what we're doing here is we're looking at basically adopting a policy that would set one standard, that would set a standard, but it wouldn't be the same standard for private market transactions as the federal law imposes on transactions in publicly traded securities. Because the publicly traded securities rule captures both insider trading, says it's insider trading if it's for private gain or for gain of the system. And we're not doing that because we're carving it out and making it specifically related only to private gain. And I just throw that open as to whether we should be, in fact, having consistency, because that's the purpose here, it seems to me. The purpose here is to say we want to extend this same kind of protection and restriction for private market transactions, even though it's not in the insider trading federal securities laws. I think the discussion of what happened in Alabama is actually sort of different in that it was raised by staff for the purpose of discussing education. But it was when I read about that I realized, oh, what they did there, the SEC is saying that was illegal, but that wouldn't have been prevented by our policy if it was a private market transaction. And so it seems to me that what we want is consistency between what can be done with a private market transaction and what can be done with publicly traded securities.
Mr. Chung? Oh, Gary, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree entirely with Paul's comment, but I'd like to just bring up one other topic. I think maybe after the last meeting or something, Brian and I raised the issue of a restricted list and the fact that CalSTRS does not have one at this time, and I'm not advocating that necessarily, but perhaps you and the Chief Investment Officer have discussed that, and I'd like to hear what the outcome of that discussion was.
Hey, there we go. We have talked about it at great length, and we have closely monitored the fund across the river, which has tried to use one for a number of years. Our main concern, frankly, is administrative burden. Most of our trading activity is in, for instance, all 3,000 stocks in the Russell 3000, so that's not very useful. There's only a few times that we've had liquidations of distributions from private equity or a buildup of positions in corporate governance that would relate to the need for producing that kind of list. Right now, there have been enough safeguards internally in the system, we think, to protect against that, but it's at the pleasure of the committee. If you want to create a restricted list in that way, it's going to take people and work to do that. It has not been, with what we do right now, it has not been a major issue, in our opinion.
excuse me, speaking for myself, I am persuaded by the administrative burden issue on that one. Having lived for 31 years in my law firm with a restricted list, it's a nightmare. In a situation where the list is even shorter, much shorter than yours might be. If you're going to create a list, you've got to create a mechanism for giving people the ability to check whether something is or isn't not on the list, and it's we did it for obvious reasons. The downside was so great that we chose to place extraordinary limitations on the attorneys and staff at the firm in order to avoid even the appearance of impropriety there. But I don't see the same downside issue here. When I say downside, we were faced with situations where at any moment in time, we would have inside information on mergers and acquisitions because we were representing either the issuer of the security or an investment banker working on it and so on and so forth. So, so I understand the circumstances under which that makes sense. And from my perspective, I don't see that here. But I defer to the wishes of the other members of the governance committee, but I am persuaded by your argument there. Any other comments or questions on this one? If not, I think that the initial presentation was that you were going to take this back and make some additional changes that you described earlier and bring it back to the committee for one last time.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I just wanted to see if Chris wanted to comment on the issue that was brought up about the private application to private equity. And well, I checked with him and he said, I'm in favor of it. 100%, so I think that I'm just.
So he's concurring with Michael's comments? Is that what you're saying, Chris?
Just to clarify, I'm 100% behind the idea of extending this out to cover private markets and as well as the fund, as well as personal. I think it should be very comprehensive.
Mr. Rosenthal?
No, I just wanted to make sure that is what's going to be incorporated into the next, because I wasn't sure from what Brian just said. So I think that is, okay, great, thank you.
Okay. All right.
Can we just say it one more? I mean,
Please, go right ahead.
Can you reiterate one more time, just for the sake of the record, because you're making comments. I asked you, so could we just have one last? What are we going to get? What are you bringing back to us, and what's it going to include? The language.
And I'm going to, since I'm going to ask Nancy Williams to start with a draft on that language, I'm going to ask her what we're going to bring back.
Okay, what we're going to put in is that material inside information, whether it's gained from publicly traded securities or private markets, if it's non-public and it's material, it can't be used for your own personal benefit or for the benefit of a CalSTRS investment.
Okay. And option number,
Okay.
All right, any other questions or comments relating to this issue, this item? Mr. Bartow?
I'm so sorry. Are we all in favor of the training component? Can I leave that in there?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.